With Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree being designed for late game, creating new weapons only really posed a challenge of making them fair for the DLC, since it is assumed you've killed most of the base game to get to this point, with New Game Plus being the only way to really see how well they hold up in the lands between. But even that's not completely accurate, between all of the buffs and levels and enemy scaling being pretty different from just booting up the old Miyazaki adventure. So it made me curious. What if you did just boot up Elden Ring and start from the very beginning with DLC weapons? I've done this once with the backhand blades, and they were at worst solid weapons that could hold their own, and at best they trivialized some of the most difficult parts of the game. And now I really wanted to try it with Great Katanas, so join me as we see if Great Katanas in their current state would have become far too broken for base game Elden Ring. Immediately spawning into the game, the first thing I did was immediately spawn all of them for me. I couldn't wield any of them, regardless of the class I started, but I still figured I could give Grafted Scion an effort, and it went surprisingly well. Truthfully though, outside of a randomizer run that I had done once, I've never used any of the Great Katanas, so while just getting a feel for it on some scrub enemies, I learned that the overhead stance Ash of War is just visually hilarious. I don't know why, I just like it. I didn't want to do the full Giga Elden Ring setup for the beginning, and instead just wanted to try something a little spicy. The one just be an RTSR 2-tap against the entire early game. So I was mostly relying on Limgrave for my build, with just a bit of its neighboring zones. But Limgrave is more than enough for smithing stones, golden seeds if you're willing to kick a man off a ledge, and other various buffs. Next, I had to make a stop at Patch's Cavern, and in case you didn't know, a little trick against Nereus the Red Phantom is to just run away from your problems. They're very respectful, and they'll just leave you alone if they see you're going through some things. What should have been a quick snipe on Patches became slightly problematic when I realized I didn't put the strength knot in my tier flask, or even grab the dex one yet, and the realization made me panic and choke against Patches. It might be over for me. But after grabbing those and taking a swig of the flask, I got Patches out of the way for the shackle and some delicious feet to chomp on. Next, I made a run up the road just a little way to the High Road Cave and killed the Big Golem Man, that's his official name, for the Blue Dancer Charm. While these weapons are obviously heavier than normal katanas, they're still a pretty great pairing with this talisman. Then I had to commit the cardinal sin. But it gave me something that would come in super handy later on. But after getting the Golden Vow Ash of War, I wanted to litmus test Margit to see where I was at. With only a +3 Great Katana, Golden Vow, the stats tiers, and Warrior Jar Shard, the damage was far from game breaking. It felt pretty on par with anything you would expect from a base game playthrough, but I wanted to see what these weapons could do, so there was something else to get. While Liurnia supplied me with the stones to get my weapon a few upgrades higher, and investing some stats were nice, the main course was the incantation Bloodflame Blade. This guaranteed a bleed proc right around the halfway fight, and that, timed with a nice stance break, made him an absolute breeze, without having to do a no-hit style Margit setup, so it was a success in my books. Into Stormvale, I grabbed the Iron Wet Blade and your typical loot, but decided to stick with what was working for Godric. Overhead stance put in great work against him, and that, along with the bleed proc, got him into phase 2 really easy. I wasn't sure what the stance damage was gonna be like on it. I assumed it was good, but wasn't sure if a charge attack while he does his phase 2 scripted move would do the trick, but it did. It went exactly on par with what most weapons tend to. And with that, Godric was down, and I got the huge buff of his Great Ruin. Those stats also made me able to wield the Dragon Hunter Great Katana, since getting my 3rd talisman slot from killing her is when the real meaty builds will start to come together, which meant just a couple more levels into my weapon, getting my Volcano Manor invitation for after, and I killed Red Wolf. Then immediately went and took out Renala. Renala was particularly stally for me. Damage was more than acceptable. It was chunking through her. And overhead stance rewarded me with another quick bleed. She just felt particularly hoppy today, but it is what it is. Sometimes you roll the dice and get a chill Renala, sometimes she's even worse than this. I was still able to take her down without much trouble though. And that got me the 3rd talisman slot after talking to the old lady at the round table hold. At this point I knew the Great Katana could hang right up there with some of the best early to mid game weapons regardless of scaling or build, and I started to really get the itch to do something more zesty. So it was time to maximize my potential by getting the weapon all the way up to a plus 19. The Ritual Sword Talisman is one of my favorite personal talismans in the entire game, and I even grabbed the Flame Shroud in Crack tier, since Blood Flame Blade gives your weapon fire damage. While all this could have been done before fighting even Margit, I was happy with how well it performed without all of this for the early game. It proved how solid it was. But to get a Somber 7, Godskin Noble was the perfect boss to do some power fantasy on with all of the potential buffs. All of this even without a body buff as well, something like Flame Grant Me Strength, and I was still able to do this to him. This was the standard buffing process for the foreseeable future, because it was just solid. Still not fully optimized, as I had the Warrior Jar Shard, just in case I wanted to bust out Weed Cutter, instead of something like the Claw or Axe Talisman. But damage was solid against DTS, and on top of that, it broke his stance right when you want it, like with all of the best weapons. I sniped the Erdtree avatar in Langdell as a litmus test for the speed and damage of the Weed Cutter weapon skill, and I kinda fell in love with it right there. There's something incredibly fun about it, and as I'll do a little later in the run, it can really start to stack some serious damage. This setup was perfect for clearing out Langdell though. My damage against Goldfree was so good that I didn't even have to rely on my skill or jump attacks. It was just an honest R1 fight that went smooth with how solid the damage is. I got a little impatient with his passive ass, but other than that it was a typical Goldfree fight. Next was Morgott, and the Shackle and Weed Cutter made it a breeze. Weed Cutter obliterated him right to his Geyser of Shit transition, and him deciding to do his slow sword AoE nonsense guaranteed it as a free fight. Just ignore me disrespecting him and not paying attention to the geysers. I decided to take care of some optional bosses before taking on Fire Giant, so I felt like Redaniel was the best place to start. This was right up there with runs with things like Stormblade or Ron Balls as the easiest Radahn fight ever. Dodging one move to get a phase transition and a perfectly placed bleed proc made it so he wasn't able to take a trip up to the stars, and he was done just like that. Sewer Moog was my ticket underground, and he also acted as a good litmus test for pure damage without bleed, since he's immune to it. But this fight was crucial because of this. I completely forgot about the poise increase that you get with the Weed Cutter skill. I guess I thought Rakshasa was just a dumb NPC fight that got it just because. It actually ended up giving me the idea for a build that I would use for late game, but we'll get to that later. And Moog went well, damage was great still, and I knew that I wouldn't have to change anything to get insane value out of these weapons. I did use the mountaintop traversal to get some better sombers so that I could start playing around with the Dragon Hunter. I knew that the weapon skill was really good because it actually deals purely physical damage, meaning all of my buffs would boost it just like a normal attack. And yeah, I liked it. Similarly to the Storm Ashivores, it feels great not having to cater some of your build around an Ashivore that scales completely separately. And the Warrior Jar Shard can just be slapped on to give it perfect synergy. I even decided to just rock this for Fire Giant. I figured if he decides to be extra roly-poly during phase 2, I would get more value out of this than trying to Weed Cutter him. And sure enough, one slash tore his braid right off. I played phase 2 in the most me way possible, and it ended up taking a little longer. Instead of properly playing to hit his hands and deal real damage, I hit my head against his legs until I got a stance break. And by the time I actually did, he was already pretty low health. But hey, I did it safely and didn't die, so I was still happy with it. Next, I wanted to max out on the damage potential, since I had every place unlocked at this point. So I went and killed Commander O'Neill to progress Millicent's questline. Weed Cutter made quick work of him, and given my HP, I got to be real greedy. And it was similar case to Godskin Apostle. Weed Cutter is just so good on top of being really fun to use. But I was able to kill Millicent and get Millicent's prosthesis, as Weed Cutter counts as successive attacks, so I could pretty easily get the boost from it. Then after getting into the snowfield, I killed the Putrid Avatar that drops the tier version of that talisman. Since they stack, and at this point in the run, there weren't any huge value tiers to be filling into the flask, it made perfect sense to rock it. The sleepable Godskin duo made for great testers for how much value these would provide, and with it being a success, I was pretty much good for the next chunk of the game. Depending on what boss was in front of me, I would swap between what I felt would be best. Weed Cutter was easily the best option for Fias champs. I was expecting the increased poise to be helpful, and making sure they didn't keep me stun locked, but it didn't even end up coming into play. Just spamming my left trigger and watching them get caught by my swooshing completely rolled them, even when I was managing the trio. Then I was able to easily swap over to the Dragon Man Katana for Fortissax, since all dragons take increased damage to varying degrees depending on their type. A fat headshot that also gave me the double hit was a pretty good indicator that this wasn't going to be overly difficult. I even found just getting the ranged part off, and even on his feet, did more than serviceable damage. So I was able to just do some face tanking and hit him a few times before that was that. Astel was annoying for the simple fact that he was Astel, and he isn't personally my cup of tea, but the fight was over soon enough since I know what I have to respect from him. I figured I could one-cycle Mogi very easily with Weed Cutter, but I grabbed the Purifying Crystal tier just to be safe. But yeah, it ended up being useless, and I would have even one-cycled him without having to rely on Bleed. I only got one Bleed proc off on him, and the rest was just the pure damage from the weapon. So that was another Remembrance down, and DLC access. And although I didn't want to use anything from the DLC as far as buffs or easy ruins, I did run and grab the Grey Katana, so that I could give my Grey Katana different affinities with overhead stance. I just didn't want to use other Ashes of War and just end up slapping on something like Cragblade. I just personally thought the run would be more fun, still restricting myself to its default Ash of War. I made a quick stop to the Moose, and then it was time for the Gauntlet right up to the end. Having the Frost and Bleed on my Grey Katana made it my choice for Malekith, since I knew I would get value from at least one of them. There isn't much to say about the fight though. I just stuck to my R1s, respected him, and had him dead efficiently enough.
To stand before the Elden Ring, to become Elden Lord, to stand still. In my bones.
Godfrey was the boss that did show that at the end of the day the Grey Katana isn't an insanely broken weapon. Damage was good, and I know I could have done some of the typical min-maxing to trivialize the fight, but I like fighting Godfrey, so I didn't feel the need. But while these weapons might have damage a little too crazy for a lot of Elden Ring, the minute you hit the DLC level of boss HP, or at least get close, they become pretty standard weapons. Even a little worse than your usual suspects of broken things. But it was a fun fight. And that only left the final bosses and a few leftover remembrances. And for a few of these, I wanted to try something a little more unconventional. I went to the DLC for one more thing. I told a wholesome man to remain sad, which rewards you with one of the highest poise armor sets in the game, Moore's Armor. Then, after a respec, I went and fought the 3 NPCs for Giga Jar to get the Great Jar's arsenal. Then the strategy was simple: have good poise and damage absorption, and cut weeds. It admittedly didn't do too much against Radagon. He was still able to break me out of my genius strat with most moves, and it just became a standard fight. But Weed Cutter was able to chunk at Elden Beast pretty hard, and the girthier damage absorption allowed me to get a greedy kill on him even though he was doing Elden Stars, so that felt pretty good. The switch to this build was mostly for Rykard, but it felt good to get a bit of value out of it against the final boss, in any weird way. I switched back to Dragon Hunter just for Placidusax in an underwhelming fight. There just really wasn't anything to note of it. It was the most standard Placi fight ever. But I did use the regular Great Katana against Loretta, and I think it's worth pointing out that she was one of the best fights for posture breaking. I just kinda got to completely roll her, knowing I didn't even have to rely on status effects, and that she would just get stunned easily. But I returned to the weed cutting life for Melania. It had pretty good results. It was a few tries because I'm not immune to getting caught off by a Melania combo, but the damage was solid throughout the entire fight. When I was able to get my skill off, it always led to good results, proccing my talisman and tier and getting reliable bleeds off. If these had released in base game, I very easily could have seen the Great Katanas, especially Rakshasas, being seen as a go-to weapon against her. And the more armor worked like a charm for Rykard. I was able to just chunk him down and never got interrupted by his lava pool while I was in the weed cutter animation. And it reliably led to a good few stance breaks throughout the fight as well. And that was that. Great Katanas aren't a game-breaking weapon. They're just good as hell. If these released with base game, I think they would be right up there with things like Bloodhound's Fang or some of the regular Katanas as the comfort weapon that a lot of people beat the game with. Hell, maybe even me included. Because while they are incredibly good with all the valuable things you want from a good weapon, more importantly, they're just really fun to use. I'm going to be doing light swords next, since I'm curious to see how they fit into the world of base game Elden Ring. They seem like the most kind of unconventional, so subscribe so you don't miss that. And most of all, thank you so much for watching my video. I'll see you in the next one.